He had never thought desperation would drag him into a glowing stall at a shady orbital bazaar, but loneliness had a way of stripping pride. The sign promised companionship rentals, written in 4 alien tongues and 1 broken version of English. He figured it was either a scam or a joke, but after months of eating ramen alone and talking back to his fridge, a joke sounded better than nothing. The clerk barely looked at him, shoved a datapad under his nose, and asked him to confirm payment. He signed, expecting maybe a hologram, maybe some kind of AI chatbot with a sultry voice. Instead, the door opened, and she walked in. 8 feet of alien girl, eyes glimmering like polished obsidian, hair that shimmered in colors his brain struggled to name, and a presence that felt less like a rental and more like an invasion. She grinned, flashing sharp teeth that should have terrified him but somehow looked like mischief incarnate. "You are mine for the night," she declared, and he coughed so hard he nearly choked on his own tongue. The first hour was pure awkwardness wrapped in pheromones. She misinterpreted every phrase he said. When he asked if she wanted to hang out, she perched on his lamp like a very tall, very smug bird. When he tried to offer her water, she sniffed it, frowned, and said, "You want me to drink clear urine?" He muttered, embarrassed, while she laughed so loudly the neighbors probably heard. She tripped his doorframe twice because his apartment wasn't built for someone who could dunk a basketball without jumping. The pheromones, meanwhile, made everything smell like strawberries mixed with engine oil, a scent so strong he half expected his toaster to start humming love songs. Every time he tried to steer the evening toward casual conversation, she twisted it into something else. "So, what brings you here?" he asked. She leaned close, antenna brushing his ear, and whispered, "Your payment did." He winced. "I meant, like, why this job?" She cocked her head, misunderstood entirely, and said, "Because humans are fragile and amusing. You break so easily, yet you still crawl toward fire." He couldn't decide if she was flirting or insulting him. Probably both. The adult comedy wrote itself in the double meanings. When she said, "Relax, human, I will not crush your pelvis unless invited," he nearly spit his drink across the table. When he muttered that he needed to get some sleep, she widened her eyes and replied, "You think you will survive all night with me awake?" He tried to clarify, but every word dug him deeper. She seemed to enjoy watching him turn red. If embarrassment were a martial art, he just earned a black belt. Still, beneath the chaos, he found himself laughing more than he had in months. She teased him for eating instant noodles, demanded to try one, and then looked offended that humans didn't duel for food. She stared at his microwave like it was black magic, called his couch a captive sponge beast, and tried to pet it. Every mundane thing about his life became an alien wonderland through her perspective, exaggerated to absurdity. His boredom cracked open, replaced with something alive, unpredictable, and ridiculously fun. When he finally dragged himself to bed, expecting her to vanish like the transaction implied, he thought he'd close his eyes and forget the madness. Instead, he woke to the sound of humming. She was still there. Not just still there, she was cooking. His fridge had been raided, his eggs scrambled into something neon blue, his bread toasted until it emitted sparks. She wore his oversized t-shirt, stretched halfway down her thighs, grinning proudly as if she had conquered breakfast itself. "Good morning, husband unit," she announced, casual as a weather report. He nearly fell out of bed. "What? No, that's not how this works. You were supposed to." She cut him off with a tilt of her head, tail curling lazily around his chair. "Silly human. You rented me. That means you claimed me. One night is forever in my culture. You paid the dowry. Contract sealed." He gaped. She bit into his last slice of toast like she owned the place. He wasn't sure if he should panic, laugh, or check if the receipt had fine print. Either way, one truth sank in fast. What was supposed to be one rented night had already spiraled into something much bigger, louder, and way harder to undo. And for the first time in years, the thought of not being alone didn't terrify him, it thrilled him. He spent the next morning trying to convince himself that what had happened was a glitch in alien culture, a misunderstanding, maybe even a prank. He had rented her for a night, paid the fee, done nothing more scandalous than argue about noodles and watch her sniff his microwave, and now she was sprawled across his couch as if she had a mortgage in his name. She'd stolen his blanket, eaten the better half of his groceries, and was humming a tune in some alien language that made his ceiling fan wobble like it was nervous. He tried to clear his throat and sound authoritative. "Look, you can't just stay here. That's not how this works." She gave him a slow grin, sharp teeth flashing, and replied, "Contract says otherwise, husband unit." He groaned. "That wasn't a contract, that was a rental." She tilted her head and produced a glowing data crystal, waving it smugly. "In my culture, payment is dowry. Dowry is binding. Binding means forever. Congratulations." The chaos only escalated. She took his tiny apartment and immediately began a hostile takeover. His living room became a shrine of glowing alien trinkets, pulsating orbs that made the neighbors complain about. Techno music bleeding through the walls. His rug floated 2 inches off the ground after she declared gravity to be optional. The sink became home to a gelatinous slime pet she'd brought in without asking, which she cheerfully introduced as our child. He tried to explain that humans didn't usually have children that lived in sinks, but she ignored him, kissing the slime and calling it precious. The way she reacted to human routines kept pushing him into hysterics and embarrassment. She saw his toaster and immediately bowed to it, declaring it a god of fire slaves. She tried laundry once, heard him mutter, "Separate whites and colors," and accused him of running a bizarre system of segregation. When he attempted to explain, she scoffed. "Humans are barbarians. Clothing deserves equality." Later, she stuffed every single item he owned into one overloaded cycle, and his wardrobe came out a rainbow mess. She wore one of his pink-stained shirts proudly and said, "Now I match your heart." His neighbors, of course, noticed. Hard not to, when an 8-foot alien kept answering the door in nothing but his oversized t-shirts, calling him mate, loud enough for the hallway to echo. Old Mrs. Patel from down the hall nearly dropped her groceries when the alien leaned out and shouted, "Husband unit! Bring the nutrient bars to bed!" By the time he ran out to do damage control, Mrs. Patel was blushing furiously and muttering about young men and their stamina. Later that week, a group of tenants cornered him in the stairwell just to ask what it was like having a supermodel cosplayer living in his place. He didn't know how to explain that she was dead serious and thought this was marriage. Every conversation with her turned into adult wordplay he couldn't escape. When he said he needed space, she laughed and stretched her arms wide, saying, "Here, now you have room inside me." When he muttered about needing to rest, she winked too obviously and said, "Then let us test your endurance." She misunderstood. "Netflix and chill," assuming it meant setting the air conditioner on maximum while watching humans suffer in nature documentaries. He found himself choking on his drink more times in a single day than in the last year combined. He kept trying to fight back with logic. "You were supposed to be here one night." She nodded solemnly. "Yes. One night." He sighed with relief before she added, "And the next night. And the next. Until the final star burns out." He argued again that it wasn't how humans did things. She mocked him, tail curling smugly around his kitchen chair. "Silly fragile thing. You touched my tail. That is sacred. That is forever." He rubbed his face and groaned. "That was an accident." She shrugged. "Accidents are binding." But underneath the frustration, he couldn't help noticing he was laughing. She was turning his quiet, miserable routine upside down, but the upside down was oddly more alive than the right way up. The way she treated his mundane world as magnificent or ridiculous, the way she twisted every phrase into a scandalous misunderstanding, the way she filled his apartment with noise, color, and chaos, it beat eating noodles alone. He found himself playing along despite himself. When she declared his microwave a spirit box, he deadpanned that it only obeyed him because he was its high priest. When she tried to feed her slime pet his leftover pizza, he snapped that their child was vegan. The absurdity spilled into every corner of his life until even his irritation came with a grin. Still, he tried one last time to reason with her, to set the boundary clear. You can't just decide I'm your husband. She leaned in close, her grin mischievous and smug. But you already decided. When you paid, when you shared food, when you let me wear your clothes. My people do not mistake these things. You belong to me. And just like that, she bit into his last candy bar, chewed slowly, and declared, And I am keeping your snacks too. By the end of that week, the line between temporary guest and permanent chaos bringer had already vanished. She had rewritten his apartment, hijacked his routines, embarrassed him in front of every neighbor, and claimed him with a stubborn confidence that refused to budge. He wanted to scream, laugh, and hide all at once. But when he caught himself smiling at the sight of her curled up in his blanket, humming that strange tune again, he realized with a shiver of panic and amusement that he didn't actually want her gone. He thought dealing with one stubborn alien was enough, but the universe laughed at his optimism. It started with a knock that shook his flimsy apartment door like a drumbeat. He opened it cautiously and found himself face to chest with three towering figures who looked like larger, scarier versions of her, each carrying ceremonial weapons and wearing armor that hummed faintly with energy. Before he could speak, they pushed past him, nearly collapsing his coffee table, and announced, We are her kin. We come to honor the binding. His brain stuttered. Honor the what now? She appeared from the kitchen with his frying pan in hand, smiling smugly. The binding, of course. Did you think only I would come? Foolish human, marriage is family business. They insisted on rituals, and every one of them was ridiculous. He was told to wrestle a tentacle beast the size of his fridge to prove his strength. He tried to refuse, then ended up luring it away with leftover peanut butter crackers because brute force wasn't going to happen. Her relatives nodded approvingly, muttering, Clever. He does not fight like us, but he survives. The second ritual involved drinking fermented slime, a thick glowing liquid that looked like something his car should run on. He gagged after one sip, then pretended he loved it to save face. She clapped and declared, Look! He is strong enough to drink death! The family roared in approval, and he barely held back the urge to vomit. The third ritual was the so-called trial of endurance, carrying her dowry chest up the stairs. The chest was roughly the size of his bed and weighed more than a small shuttle. He stared at it in horror. She smiled innocently and said, Do not worry. If you fail, you are only dishonored forever. He muttered curses but managed to wedge a dolly underneath, dragging the monstrous box up step by step while sweating like he'd run a marathon. By the time he collapsed on his floor, they declared him worthy, even though he suspected the chest was mostly rocks. The culture clash didn't stop at rituals. They asked about human customs, and when he explained dating apps, they were horrified. You choose a mate by swiping on a glowing rectangle? One demanded. Even hatchlings duel with blades for something so sacred. She laughed at his expense, wrapping her tail smugly around his leg. See? I chose well. He did not swipe, he paid the dowry without hesitation. He wanted to argue, but her family looked too delighted, so he shut his mouth before more disaster fell out of it. Daily life turned into a circus of misunderstandings. When he tried to set boundaries, explaining he needed alone time, her kin treated it as a loyalty test. One of them followed him into the bathroom just to make sure he wasn't plotting betrayal. When he snapped that humans liked privacy, they tilted their heads and whispered, Humans are shy about bodily functions. Fascinating. He wanted to sink into the toilet and vanish. At dinner, he tried explaining splitting the bill, and her relatives slammed their fists on the table. Unacceptable. On our world, one pays with blood, the other with bone. You humans are too soft. He mumbled that he was fine with soft. The neighbors, already suspicious, now had material for gossip on a galactic scale. The landlord complained about glowing slime trails in the hallway. Kids whispered about the alien giants living in 3B. And when her relatives shouted in their booming voices about heat cycles and trial of the pelvis, His building's entire floor assumed things far spicier than the truth. He tried to explain to Mrs. Patel again, but she patted his arm, blushing, and said, "No need to explain, dear. Just pace yourself." He nearly screamed. Yet somewhere in the chaos, he realized he was adapting. He stopped panicking at the glowing trinkets, or the slime pet in the sink. He began laughing when her kin mistook his microwave popcorn for ceremonial fire offerings. He started taking pride in surviving each alien ritual by twisting it with human logic. He didn't win through brute force, he won by being clever, resourceful, and occasionally shameless. The more they demanded, the more he found ways to sidestep, outwit, or improvise. And strangely, they respected him for it. Every failure turned into proof of human stubbornness. Every ridiculous ritual became another reason for them to nod approvingly and mutter, "This one is strange, but he is strong." Through it all, she kept watching him with a grin that was equal parts smug and affectionate. She teased him constantly, reminding him how fragile humans were, but beneath the mockery was pride. When he finally collapsed on the couch after the last ordeal, she curled up beside him, massive frames spilling over the furniture, and whispered, "See? You do not need to fight like us. You just need to be you. And that is why I chose you." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck. For once, he didn't want to protest. He just sat there, sweaty, exhausted, humiliated, and smiling. Because as insane as her world was, as overbearing as her family was, and as loud as the misunderstandings were, he couldn't remember the last time life had been this absurdly fun. And that terrified him more than any ritual ever could. The girl's leap had been impulsive, reckless even, but what followed afterward carried a rhythm of strange inevitability. Her pounce had not been the savage tearing he expected, but a clumsy collision that left crumbs from the stolen snack scattered between them, her feral intensity softened by the comical sight of her licking sauce from her claws. The human's startled protest became laughter when he realized she wasn't trying to kill him. She was hungry, desperate, yet oddly proud about it, as if ambushing a man over food was a worthy hunt. Her sharp ears twitched at his chuckles, and she bared her fangs, not in threat, but in confusion, unaccustomed to being mocked so openly. He teased her, casually remarking that humans had better ways of sharing meals than biting each other's hands, which only deepened her glare until her tail betrayed her with an involuntary swish of amusement. From that moment, she didn't wander back into the night. Instead, she stayed by his side, sulking one moment, curious the next, circling his tent like a self-appointed guardian. For every attempt he made to push her away, she countered with another excuse to remain, claiming the forest was too dangerous, that she was still hungry, that his scent lingered on the food she wanted more of. Slowly, the boundary between intruder and companion blurred, each interaction thick with tension, humor, and something neither admitted aloud. The tent became less his refuge and more their den, where her feral instincts clashed with his human sarcasm until even silence carried meaning. It was not long before the clash of their worlds spilled into deeper arguments, ones that echoed far beyond a stolen snack. She mocked his human weakness, how he relied on fire instead of claws, metal instead of instinct. He, in turn, ridiculed her dramatics, how she treated every rumble of her stomach or prickle of her fur as a crisis worth declaring like war. Yet in each jab and counter, there was an intimacy they both pretended not to notice. When storms howled outside, she curled into the tent without asking, and he pretended not to care that her warmth pressed against him like another blanket. He learned she had been outcast by her pack for reasons she refused to fully admit, and she learned he was traveling alone not because he had to, but because he chose to, driven by a stubborn pride she recognized all too well. The humor that sparked between them became a shield, disguising the weight of their secrets, until one careless touch or lingering glance cracked it open. Every accidental brush of claw against skin or hand against fur left them unsettled, trapped in the realization that neither of them knew how to step back anymore. The tent that had once smelled only of canvas and human supplies now carried her musk, her wildness woven into every corner, and he found himself defending her presence as if it were natural, inevitable. She might still tease him, claiming she only stayed because he provided food and comfort, but her eyes betrayed her, glowing softer in the firelight each time he shared without hesitation. The longer she lingered, the more the wilderness outside seemed like a backdrop to their growing entanglement. He began to understand her habits, how her ears flicked before she spoke, how her growls sometimes masked laughter, how her snarls often hid worry. She, in turn, learned the cadence of his sarcasm, the way his words carried weight even when wrapped in jest, the rare silences that meant more than any insult. Nights became conversations that blurred into dawn, where bold claims slipped into softer confessions. She declared she would never bow to a human, yet she was the one who returned each night without fail. He insisted he wanted solitude, yet he made room for her without complaint, shifting supplies so her nest of furs would fit beside his. The humor between them no longer simply hid attraction, it sharpened it, every joke daring the other closer, every retort pulling them deeper. When she pressed him with questions about humans, why they built shelters so fragile, why they chased stars instead of prey, he answered with honesty laced in mockery, which only made her lean in further. The push and pull became ritual, a dance neither wanted to end, where every insult carried affection, every argument burned with unspoken promise. By the time she claimed the tent as hers as much as his, the human no longer argued. He only smiled at the absurdity of it all. A werewolf girl who once pounced over food now refusing to leave his side, her laughter mingling with his under the fabric of a tent that had turned into something far more permanent.